Okay, I had this pre-recorded. I was gonna take the time between Christmas and New Year's off to work on some other things, to just relax and play some video games for the sake of playing them, not for analysis, not to make a video, but this was not to be. My concern in running the previous video I did as is was that people were going to misconstrue it as a reaction to recent drama as opposed to something I recorded and posted before the recent drama. So here we go. For people who know what I'm talking about, this was something I promised to do a couple weeks back as part of my year-end recap. This is not a part of the recent dust-up. I am not trying to downplay people's concerns on that matter. I think that there are serious concerns, but they're not the part of my situation that was dragged into it. The part involving me involves false accusations made against me, and I particularly asked that particular journalist not to push that because all it does is spreads the false accusations against me. There are other more serious issues regarding a certain individual that are relevant to this topic. I am not going to get into them. I feel like I should also point out an ongoing thing where some people are still unhappy with me over something that happened years ago, a comment about a men's rights group in Western Canada that through misunderstandings and broken telephone went from me saying that I have an irrational bias where this group is concerned to taking my statement of irrational bias as fact. The context of the video, which had to do with a situation at the Calgary Comic-Con years ago, was me saying, I don't want to have an opinion on this. I don't think I can detach emotionally from it. And I still see people going on about me on Gamergate related message boards on this issue. Yes, I am being vague about this because this particular group that got unhappy with me, and I really wish we could have a conversation about this before people started screaming, but this is not to be. This particular group gets very unhappy when anything is said about them. And so I am not mentioning them because the problem before was mentioning them to declare my bias, not a statement of facts they still considered defamatory. So that's why I'm not mentioning them. It's not because I'm trying to be cute. It's not because I'm trying to be clever. It's just trying to calm the situation down so I can actually talk about something that is important. Okay, moving on. I have said in the past that I believe that Gamergate has been one of the most poorly reported phenomenon in recent quasi-political pop culture history. And this is becoming a fruit of the poisonous tree phenomenon that people are now writing articles like the one you see here, comparing Trumpism to Gamergate, and it makes the same logical mistake because of the poor reporting. This article states Trumpism and the alt-right as equivalent, not intersecting phenomenon that, one hand washes the other, but the same thing. This was the same mistake that people made regarding Gamergate and the alt-right. It was a series of intersecting phenomenon, not the same thing. And so you see these opening paragraphs where they write off the writing off of harassment, misogyny, the bad stuff as an unfortunate side effect of talking about things on the internet. But the reality is, it is. And this is something we have to accept and factor into our thinking so that we can actually get the right conclusions about these things. Nobody likes the idea that conversations held predominantly over the internet are going to be charged, I should say, with crappy comments, with people deliberately trying to get a rise using deliberately offensive things. But the way Twitter is structured, the way some subreddits are structured, unfortunate side effect is the best way to describe it. It was not what drove the original concerns. It was what got grafted onto it. And part of this is because I get why the Gamergate movement decided to go grassroots, non-vertical structure. They decided to do like a horizontal structure, meaning there were no leaders, there was no chain of command. Now, the thing about that, yes, many environmental groups, Occupy Wall Street, groups like that, did that because it was harder to shut the entire group down by arresting one or two people. That is the purpose of that structure. The downside of it is they can take any comment from a fringe personality and treat it as an official communication of the group. This has been part of the breakdown in reporting this, because you only have 1,200 words, if you're lucky. Most of the time it's below 800 words to tell any story about, and by tell story, I mean, report a story. But you can't get into a lot of nuance in that little time. And that's been part of the problem as well. Now, the third part of the issues regarding the reporting of this issue, Gamergate, it's like Voldemort. You're so hesitant, at least I am. I'm hesitant to even say the word. It's like, we shouldn't. It was a big internet fight. It was an internet slap fight. It wasn't anything to be terribly afraid of. But what happened that caused more confusion is that the game's press itself was the thing that was under fire, was the thing that was at the center of this controversy, as well as some prominent figures in gaming, male and female, and for various reasons. Not all were nefarious, not all were poor reporting. Some of it was just an organic phenomenon, but the men who people completely freaked out about got, faded into the background. The attacks against the women were the ones that became the story. And are they part of the story? Yes, they are part of the story, but they are not an isolated event the way it was reported. And part of the issue with that is because the gaming press were the story. And when you become the story, you can't report on the story effectively. That was the issue I got into with covering this thing, that you can't try to cover the story without being a part of the story. Because people start making personal attacks against you, and then people, at least in my case, it's like, look, a woman being harassed on the internet. And it's like, no, I'm a reporter, and reporters take a lot of crap. And so I backed away from this story, and I basically backed away from video games reporting and moved more into analysis, because I think it's something fewer people are doing. It's something I enjoy better. And there's just so much benevolent sexism going on in video games right now. It's very hard for a woman to be seen as an equal in this regard. And either we need to start sending the message to male journalists that they deserve to take less crap flung at them, or women have to expect to take more, because the standards have to be equal. It can't be one standard for one gender and another standard for another. And this is all connected to the Gamergate debate, but because the game's press were the subject of the story, not the reporter of the story, these more mainstream publications like The Guardian here, like the New York Times, places that really don't understand gaming or gamers or video games as an industry or a community, they start getting involved and they start reporting the skewed perspective as fact. And because these publications have fairly decent reputations, these have become the narrative. This has become the accepted story regarding the Gamergate controversy. The problem is it's not true. It's inaccurate. Is it true that there was an alt-right influence on the Gamergate movement? Yes. Is it true that Gamergate was an extension of the alt-right, or primarily or majority the alt-right? No. And how do I know this? Because I must have talked to hundreds of different people while all this was going on. Some of them were alt-right. Most of them were not. There was a minority of alt-right voices that got a lot of power because they know how to persuade. I disagree with everything the alt-right stands for, but they know how to persuade. I will give them that. And they know how to appeal to emotion. They know how to get people riled up and mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. They know how to push those buttons. But that doesn't mean that the people who had their buttons pushed are card-carrying members of the alt-right. Why does this matter? Because we can't figure out what happened, learn from it, and have everybody be better and therefore the world be a better place if we're taking the wrong lessons from this whole thing. And right now, we're taking the wrong lessons from this whole thing. And the rise of Trumpism and the rise of Gamergate is not just about people wanting to be racist and sexist and anti-Semitic. It's a much more simple motivator. People just don't feel heard. People don't feel like their opinion matters. And that's true of right-wing thought, left-wing thought. And the difference is when right-wingers feel like they're not heard, they scream louder. When left-wingers feel like they're not heard, they pout and go use adult coloring books. And so the disenfranchised left-wing voters either didn't come out to vote or voted third party because there were some third-party options that appealed to left-wingers, including the libertarians, which was odd to me because as much as they were running on the libertarian ticket, they were both Republicans. But they supported the legalization of pot. That was something people understood. And I'm not saying that's the only reason, but, I was being a bit glib there. However, it was strange that these ostensibly left-wing people were talking about Johnson as an alternative to Clinton. Stein, I completely understand. If you're a left-winger who is not a Hillary supporter, that makes sense. And I'm not saying that people don't have the right to vote third party. I'm saying that this was why disenfranchisement on the right led to the election of Donald Trump. Disenfranchisement on the left led to the election of Donald Trump, because the things people did were different. The protest vote on the right was Trump. The protest vote on the left was not Clinton. And this was a year of the protest vote. And this is the thing about Gamergate that is getting lost in this whole Gamergate is the alt-right because reasons argument. It's not about political affiliation. There are a lot of left-wingers who consider themselves pro-Gamergate. It is about disenfranchisement. It is about people feeling like they don't matter. And that cuts across the political spectrum. I think the political spectrum as it is in the US right now is something of a misnomer anyway. I think most people sit somewhere in the middle between the two. And there isn't a ton of difference between the two mainstream political parties in terms of thinking. It's shades. And so people do feel cut off from the levers of government and cut off from the ability to enact any sort of change. That buzzword of agency. People feel like they lack agency. And so when relatively small things like accusations of collusion in the game's press crop up, people get very passionate about these things because they feel like they can do something about them. And that was what I got from talking to various people in the Gamergate movement. Now, the other big problem from a reporter's perspective is so few people were willing to go on the record. Because for some odd reason, people didn't realize that on the record means not an internet pseudonym or anonymously. That's background. You know, the whole reason someone is going on the record is that you can trust, you can figure out whether this is a trustworthy source. And this is the thing about reporting. This is why trust in the media is so important, because reporting is not an academic study. Reporting is not science. Reporting is basically the first responders of information. And so you don't have the time to run surveys. You don't have the time to collect quantitative data. You're taking a qualitative approach. You're getting as much information as you can in a fairly short period of time and trying to make it as useful as possible. It's a huge difference. And so you can get a couple of quotes to build the story around. You need to get a face to attach the story to. But then, you know, in rare instances, people can be anonymous, but that has been overused. And so now people are weaponizing that as well. But the bulk of any story, if you look, is background. So you can report on stuff you observed, you can report on stuff you were told, but you don't actually have a source for that. You know, if you witness someone getting killed, you're not going to get a comment from the dead person. That is the reporter observing it. Can the reporter necessarily prove that they witnessed this dead body? Well, if there's a photo, perhaps. But running photos of dead bodies tends to be frowned upon on the front page of newspapers. So trust is integral to journalism. And the game's press just doesn't have people's trust anymore for many reasons that, you know, no time to get into here. This is not the same as an alt-right agenda against, you know, women and minorities. And this is what it's been turned into, and that's not what it is at all. And until we realize what it actually is, these things are going to keep happening, because what's happened, well, this group who felt ignored now feels demonized. And ironically, that was the whole spark, that people felt less and less like games reporting was for them. And then they felt like games reporting was actively against them because of the whole quote unquote gamers are dead narrative. And so now linking the Gamergate movement to this alt-right thing intrinsically is compounding that feeling that anybody who complained was demonized. That's marginalization. That's disenfranchisement. You get social issues when marginalization hits a certain critical mass. We know this. We know this because of science. And that's what concerns me about this whole thing. We haven't solved the problem. There was all that unpleasantness, and we didn't take the right lessons from it. So what's the point of it all? There has to be a point. And, you know, part of the people who are still mad at me for things that happened 3 years ago, that's telling to me that people are so willing to hang on to those things because I think it gives them a small sense of control. But what people like that seem to fail to realize is that, look, there has been greater understanding built by those of us that decided to talk to each other instead of yelling about each other. And part of the thing I learned was some of the sensitivities of portions of the men's rights movement, which is why I don't mention them by name anymore, because they get upset. That's a small thing. I can do that, right? I don't have to agree with a group to respect their right to dignity. And this is the message I feel that was really lost. You have to allow someone to keep their dignity when you disagree with them. Unfortunately, we are living in times where people were forced to pretend to like each other. And so people didn't get to develop that muscle of respecting someone you really don't like. And to me, I've said this before, respect is what's left when the warm feelings are gone, the liking someone is gone. Respect is what allows somebody to go, you know what, I can't be objective about this. I'm too emotional regarding that. And the fact that that got so misconstrued where I was concerned just indicates to me that I'm on the right track here. There is something to this, that if somebody doesn't like you, you're bad. If somebody likes you, you're good. Until they don't like you anymore, and then all the bad stuff starts coming out. And the interesting thing about some of the alt-right figures that were involved in Gamergate was I didn't talk to very many people who actually liked these figures. A lot of people actively disliked these figures, but they felt they were all they had because they couldn't get a hearing from the mainstream left-leaning publications. And it's true. I tried to pitch to the New York Times op-ed and got nothing. And you'd think that a woman who was directly involved in the controversy would be an interesting voice on the whole thing, but nope. And when I asked, press sites, if I could do something, the bigger ones, it was, nope, we've covered it enough. And so I know for a fact that that's true. That was a fair concern, that they were, and this was misguided. Sometimes it's better to have no ally in the press than an ally in the press that's going to come back and bite you because of other poor behavior, especially when you're arguing ethics. Because the thing that people need to understand about the press is not on your side, ever. The press is on the side of selling papers or getting clicks, and then if there's time, reporting the facts. But even reporting the facts have no side. The facts are just the facts. And to want somebody to only tell your side of the story is a great way to get manipulated by partisans. Because a partisan will tell you what you want to hear, because they want you as a foot soldier in their ideological battle. And you may not even be aware that that's what you're being made into. But that is what's been happening through fake news and through, identity politics. And the big irony is that I think this whole alt-right thing is a backlash to identity politics, because on the one hand, white, straight, cisgendered men are scum, according to large portions of the internet and the liberal intelligentsia. But you can't participate in cultural experiences that don't align with white, straight, cisgendered men, because that's cultural appropriation. And so all that this group has left is a series of cultural touchstones that have been thoroughly demonized and invalidated. And no one expected trouble? Like it or not, white men still there are more white men in positions of authority than people who have other identity descriptors. And so when they get marginalized, they can do something about it. Because yes, there is an increased marginalization. There is still greater empowerment just because of the way certain groups have been socialized to think. It's that thing I talked about again, before, where those right-wing white men voted. They didn't go to their coloring books and their safe spaces. They went out and voted. And they didn't let so-called voter, perception of voter suppression stop them. Because it's not that people were turned away. People thought, I'm going to be turned away, so they didn't go out to vote. As opposed to showing up without ID and wanting to vote anyway. I don't have ID, but this is where I live. Make a scene. Show up. Okay, you'll get turned away. So what? You're not going to get arrested. You're just going to get turned away, but you can say to yourself, you tried. And these people who affiliate, who self-describe themselves as alt-right, got off their butts and voted in larger numbers than other political fringes who talk a good game, but at the end of the day, sit there and cry about it. Instead of, and they showed that they were willing to make compromises. Trump wasn't a perfect fit, but it was the best choice. The same way certain Gamergate figures weren't a perfect fit, but people determined they were the best choice. And so they got heard. They might not be liked, but they got heard and they had some successes. And, unfortunately, their successes were losses for those of us who relied on the overall health of the video games press advertising revenue for our jobs. And so some of us lost them. But, I could have been angry about that. But my thought is, what were these people supposed to do? They seized the power they thought they had, and I can't blame them for that. And it had a negative impact on my financial situation. But again, it's, do you get up and do you do something about it? Do you go vote, metaphorically? Or do you cry in your safe space with a coloring book? These are your choices. And if you choose cry in your safe space with a coloring book, you really can't complain when you don't like the outcome. Why? You didn't step into the arena. And a lot of this is people are too worried about being liked. And I get it. It's one thing for somebody to not like you. You can accept that. The fact that somebody despises you so much that they lie about you, that takes some getting your head around. But this is the reality of stepping into the arena. And unfortunately, this, we are solidarity, we are sisterhood, has not taught people how to deal with the feeling of being despised. And if you try to do anything worthwhile, you will be despised by some groups. And unfortunately, too many people have been given the message, well, that means don't do it. When we should be giving people the opposite message. Screw them. Do it. Go out and vote. Go out and get involved. Go out and make something happen. And as much as I disagree with some of Gamergate's methods, I cannot take away from them that they got off their butts and they tried to do something. And I don't have to like it to respect it. And if we had more of that, we would have greater clarity on this issue. And I'm trying to figure out what to do about this because the leadership is not going to come from these publications that just want clicks. They don't think they want clicks, but they're not really interested in the truth. They're not. I've tried. And so this is me. This is me stepping up and voting. This is me stepping up and being counted. I'm telling my truth as I see it. And I'm going to leave it there because that's all I wanted to do. But hopefully you found this informative. And hopefully people won't misconstrue what I'm saying and what I'm trying to do here. Oh, live in hope.